We have got to stop meeting like this. We just had a film festival wrap up for another year here in London. It's called the London Film Festival. It was a fun one. I mean, it always is. But you sit and watch the best new cinema for about 10 days straight. It gets exhausting very quickly, but it is always fun. And this year, guess what? I watched a few films. I know, a surprise to many, I'll bet. And look, I've spoken on the channel before about this, but I'll level with you. I've been feeling burnt out during the festival this year, and I wasn't sure exactly how to tackle the content this time around. Because usually, you'll have noticed if you follow the channel for a while, I put up a bunch of videos every day at the festival, chatting about all the films I'm seeing. And this year, I haven't wanted to do that, really. So I didn't. End of story. But I ended the festival and was sat there with a lot of thoughts in my head swirling around about the films I've just seen, as you do tend to do, and I figured, hey, I do kind of want to chat about some to you guys. I don't want to let them just sort of be forgotten in the brain, in the ether, as it were, and I figure some of you probably want to hear my thoughts on some things. So I'm going to do what every good YouTuber has to do at some point and compile those into a quick and easy video. That's what this is. Some London Film Festival reviews. I have, however, made a very grave error here in that I started the video without a tea, no beverage in hand. I can feel my British citizenship being stripped away from me as I speak. Let's fix it. Right, we are back. Tea in hand. It's go time. I'm feeling good. I don't know exactly how many films I'm going to talk about, but we'll probably get through a fair few. So if you do want to skip to any specific film in particular, I'm going to do the right thing and put chapter markers so you can skip to the films you're interested in hearing about. But do just not do that. You know, stick around for the whole video. Why make a tea just to skip through it? Do you know what I mean? What should we start with, eh? What film should we... I saw like 23 films at the festival this year, which is certainly a number. You would have seen a lot of my thoughts on those if you follow me on Letterboxd already. So I guess that's a spoiler alert. Don't tune out if you do. Follow me there. Keep watching. Let's start with The Real Pain. It was, after all, the first film I kicked off things in the press schedule with. This one is the sophomore directorial effort from Jesse Eisenberg. I believe it is. I don't think he's done more than one film before this. I might be wrong. I have been prone to do that in the past. But it's basically about two cousins who, in the wake of their grandma's death, end up traveling over to her old house, well, her old home in Eastern Europe, where they sort of connect with each other, but are also connecting with their family and learning about their family history as it pertains to the Holocaust and the oppression of the Jewish people in that time in the world. And this one is a really kind of, I suppose, eccentric film in the exact sort of way you'd expect a Jesse Eisenberg film to be. That is, that it is a quite sort of charming and bumbling way through these characters. And I think that really, really works for it. I mean, Jesse Eisenberg in the lead role is fantastic, but he's alongside Kieran Culkin as his cousin. The both of them have this really solid and strong and quite affecting dynamic. I think it takes a little while to shake its kind of, I don't know, archetypal character essence, right? Like there's a wild card, there's a kind of more tightly strung cousin, and the two of them aren't really the same people, and they're learning about, do you know what I mean? It's sort of, you kind of guess how that's gonna go in the film, and it does pretty much go that way. But what I like about Jesse Eisenberg's sort of writing here, and I suppose his direction and his performance all wrapped into one, is that it is able to use that to go to some interesting places when it comes to grief, and specifically sort of environmental grief and generational grief, right? And the threads between ourselves and our family and our ancestors and history itself, so to speak. But it is also able to really quite confidently dangle that tightrope between comedy and drama, right? And so scenes are bubbling with the two of those, which I think really works in its favor. I think that's what makes it such a charming and kind of warm and delightful time. It didn't particularly blow me away in the same way I think it has done for others, but I think that also depends on your relationship with the exact family dynamics on screen, right? And your relationship with the history on screen. But it's very impactful actually in certain moments, and it's really fun and it's really charming, and it was just a lovely time. I really, really enjoyed this one. Where should we go next? Anora. Let's do a new Sean Baker. Huh? This one was one of my most anticipated of the year, and I was like, why didn't it show at Venice? I was fully expecting to have watched it at Venice but it didn't. So I had to wait till London. There's your story time. Love Sean Baker. I think he's a fantastic director and writer. You know, he's done Tangerine, Florida Project, Red Rocket most recently. I'm a really big fan of the way he builds his characters, or more specifically the way he puts his characters into the world and into the environment around them, right? I think he's got this amazing ability of really identifying the core humanity of people. Well, humanity is maybe the wrong word, but the core kind of ticking of people. And that means that his characters are able to just kind of live in his films really, really genuinely, right? I think it's easy for directors and writers to create dramas and create narratives that, although they are fantastic, you know, often still feel like we're watching characters on a film, on a screen. And my favorite thing about Sean Baker's film work is just how natural it all feels, even though you are watching obviously constructed things, right? And the narrative of Anora here is, again, a very kind of constructed narrative, right? The film that Anora, the character, is in, and that Mikey Madison's performance is in, is a very kind of over-the-top, kind of wild screwball ride, I suppose, which to be honest I didn't expect from it. But the character of Anora is so wonderfully realised and so well performed by Mikey Madison that you just very quickly, very comfortably settle into it, understand what it's about, understand who she is and what she's doing, and are just along for the ride. And it ends on an absolute stonker of an ending, and I'm aware that stonker could have negative or positive connotations, literally depending on who you ask. In this case, that's good. As I'm saying, it had a good ending. I liked it. Really big fan of this stuff. Definitely one of the stronger films of the year. One of the strongest films of the festival. Big fan. Let's have a quick sip and see what else I've got on my list. Blitz. Let's talk about Blitz. Steve McQueen. Listen, another director, I suppose, in a very similar vein to Sean Baker, who I love and who I will always be seated for, and who, in a different way, does really great, effective stuff with the characters in their films, right? I love Steve McQueen's approach to Community, I guess. The sort of interpersonal connections between characters in his films. He has a really great way of pulling those out. And so I was really excited to see what he would do with Blitz, which, you'll be surprised to hear, is a film about the Blitz, which was basically when they just dropped loads of bombs over London. And, you know, being British, living in London, having grown up here, we learn a lot about this. And I think one of my fears going into this would be that it would, I don't know, rehash just essentially a lot of the same stuff that we all know and that we've all seen done a lot in various different forms of media growing up, and then just sort of end and feel like it sort of leaves you with that was a Blitz film vibe, you know? I didn't think it would go that way because I have a lot of faith in Steve McQueen as an artist, as a director, to mine a lot of great stuff. And it really disappoints me to say that I do think it did just sort of end up being a pretty straightforward Blitz film. And listen, that's not to say that there aren't a lot of great flourishes in here that are absolutely the work of a great director who knows what he wants to do. And I think Steve McQueenisms are present enough for this to feel worthwhile. But it's the most confused and clunky I've ever seen a Steve McQueen film, right? It feels like it's constantly at odds. Perhaps not at odds with, but clashing between a very straightforward World War II Blitz narrative between a mother and a son and family and community, but then also, you know, taking these detours to illuminate certain aspects of that we haven't seen illustrated before. That's the side of things that I really like seeing from Steve McQueen's work, and that I think are in here and are good when they happen. You know, we go and see a jazz club in wartime, and there's this kind of extended sequence of dancing in this jazz club that comes alive in the exact kind of way you want a musical dance sequence to come alive in a Steve McQueen film. And moments like that are great in there, but I think as you get going, it quickly becomes apparent that it is really just about a mother and a son trying to get back to each other. And I don't think that relationship is as interesting and as moving, at least for me, as some of the hinted kind of relationships elsewhere in the film, which makes for a really frustrating watch. You know, I don't want to watch a Steve McQueen film and feel like I've been kind of shortchanged in the Steve McQueen front. And a lot of people will argue that there are, enough Steve McQueen-isms in there for it to work. But it just ended up frustrating me and feeling more shallow than I would have liked to have seen from this one. And again, a sort of film which kind of makes me angry at the child actors, which is never fun to do, but like, child acting can really make or break a film. And it isn't the most egregious child acting I've seen in a film before, but it certainly sucks you out of a lot of the dramatic moments when you got little kids talking like Cockney. Yeah, you want a jam sandwich? And no, dude. And I don't want that. Could you leave the film kindly? They didn't. Well, I guess they did, but that's for anyone that's seen the film. Let's do the end next, in the bloody middle of a video. I like to push buttons, I like to break rules, what can I say? The end, right? Incredibly interested by this film, and who am I kidding? Very excited for before going into it, right? It's Tilda Swinton, George Mackay, and Michael Shannon in a underground apocalyptic musical, right? The boxes are being ticked here that I need you to know are just like the top boxes on the list, I think, of film quotas. If you're starting to talk to me about films, lead with any of those, I'm going to sit and watch your film. And I did sit and watch this film. It's from Joshua Oppenheimer, who was a documentary director before this. He did The Act of Killing, and I think his other one was called The Sound of Silence. Correct me on that if I am wrong there. But they're great documentaries, very heavy and very kind of interesting looks at the human psyche, right? And our relationship to the acts we're committing and our conscience, I suppose, in very horrible circumstances there. So I was incredibly excited to see what he'd do, firstly with his first narrative feature film, but secondly with this premise, right? Underground musical Tilda Swinton. Listen, guys, it's great. I really enjoyed this one. We'll cut to the shit on that one. I think it's a film which is not going to work for a lot of people, and in a weird way almost threatens very regularly throughout its runtime to completely lose me. But I just was completely absorbed throughout the entire thing. It's a long and sort of slow film. It's not a musical in the sense of like happy, fun, big, showy musical numbers. It's more of a very subdued and kind of desaturated musical, I'd describe it as. And that is something that tends to be quite hit or miss for me in cinema. But I think actually Oppenheimer really understands how to do that here. It can sometimes feel a bit annoying and lazy and obnoxious to me when you see those musicals that do the kind of like really naturalistic way through songs, right? Your Les Mis and all that side of things. It can sometimes feel wrong in the wrong places, but actually there is a motive behind the musical numbers in here. There's this kind of shared delusion of the characters in the film, which I think lends itself really well to the musical format. People have varying different talents in the film, I'd say, when it comes to singing. I'm obviously the biggest fan of Tilda Swinton. I'll be the first to say she can't really sing that well, and it is definitely a film which falls into the nasally robotic auto-tune side of things when you're dealing with actors who are not musically trained. But again, it didn't really bug me as much because it is all part of this shared delusion, I think, of the characters in the film. And Oppenheimer, perhaps unsurprisingly given his documentary work, it is really effectively able to use that to mine the characters' relationship with what's happened to the world, right, and what's happening with each other and where they are, and the kind of collective guilt and trauma about the state that the world was left in this kind of unshown post-apocalyptic environment. And I think that really does work and really does mine some fascinating and beautiful and interesting character moments, which are just obviously explored very, very well by very, very talented actors. That always helps. But I think it's a really kind of deeply ironic and actually quite funny, but also sad look at human guilt, right? Watching Michael Shannon plead about whether or not there was any way he could have saved this or stopped this while he's, sat behind his nice leather desk in his underground bunker, singing to a picture of his dog on the wall while there's a beautiful landscape of the world behind him. Things like that. There's a real sense of, I suppose, kind of, it's not entirely cynicism, but it's a kind of deep irony in a lot of what's happening in the film, which I found really interesting, fascinating, and absorbing. Right, a couple more to go through. Another sip of tea. Nickel Boys, right? This is, again, another film which quickly came out of nowhere this year for me and quickly became one of my more interested and more anticipated films of the year because it got a lot of buzz and I ended up absolutely loving it. This thing was really, really wonderful, and in terms of a kind of formal use of the film medium, really quite groundbreaking, right? Which I think is quite a big word to use when it comes to certain films, and I think has its own set of expectations that are going to come as I say that to you. So I don't want to, or rather want to be careful not to overhype things there, but when you see the film, you'll realise just how different this is to any other film this year. It's almost entirely shot from a first-person perspective, but not in the same kind of way that we've seen done before from films like Hardcore Henry, you know, like that kind of GoPro first-person perspective. Not like that. This is a very artistic and beautiful and considered way through the point of view filmmaking style, and I think it is incredibly impactful for that, right? It is essentially about a group of boys as they navigate through a Florida-based reform school during the 1960s. They're all African Americans, so as you can imagine, they are having a very bad time, to put it lightly, and I don't want to say too much about the specifics of the film just because it's the sort of film you just kind of have to absorb to really appreciate to its max. But I will say that it is one of the more gorgeous films I've seen this year from a cinematography aspect and from a formal aspect. It is incredibly audacious in the way it just commits to telling a story this way. But again, it's another film from the festival that is a documentary filmmaker's first foray into narrative film. And I think there's some really interesting kind of tools that those sort of filmmakers pick up from documentary that can be really effective in the narrative realm. And here with Ramel Ross, I haven't actually seen his previous work, but he has this genuine kind of understanding of different forms of media, I suppose, of how we absorb the stories we're told and the things we see, and he weaves that in every single moment of the film. So we get different perspectives, for one, in the film. It's not all first person. It does weave between third and other perspectives, but there's also some really interesting kind of building of montages in the film, which sort of weave in and out of, towards the latter half of the film, actual documented media, right? And I think it ends up doing some really interesting stuff when it comes to approaching our look back on stories and look back on history, right? This is based off a novel, and as far as I can tell, the story, correct me if I'm wrong, is fictional but based on a true actual school that was there and these boys that were being affected by it. So it's really interesting the way that Ramel Ross approaches that with the camera here, and definitely it's one of those films where the camera and the filmmaking around the story is actively being put at the forefront, right? It's not trying to disguise its filmmaking qualities, which I think is probably what's going to put off some people, and I think is what might lend it getting the term, you know, gimmick throughout. It's very easy to see a film like this and go, gimmick, because it didn't work for me. But I think it is earned, and it is beautiful for that, and it's definitely one of the more interesting films I've seen this year for that. However, it does still fall into traps that I think feel like more annoying in the film because the rest of the film is so interesting with the way it attaches its form to itself so effortlessly. It feels like it will kind of stop every now and then to quite obviously sort of shoehorn bits of narrative and bits of character in there, almost as if it doesn't trust its viewers to be fully on board with the whole kind of languid kind of dreamlike way through its narrative, and that's very frustrating. I think it feels, and this is complete guesswork, but it feels a lot to me like a film that was made one way and then the producers or the money behind it or some people higher up weren't confident in the film's ability to just be itself, and so needed to make sure that it did have audiences where it needed to have them. And that means that there are scenes where things are really gorgeously shown and then characters will just kind of explain the things we've just had really gorgeously shown to us in a way which feels stilted, to be honest, for the film and for the scene it's in. And those are jarring when they happen, and they happen a few too many times for me to fully ignore. But it doesn't completely derail things, and I think actually Ramel Ross is so great at building these gorgeous kind of sweeping sequences of montage of different perspectives, and every time it comes back to that, it gets you right back in the palm of its hand, and it ends really gorgeously. I think overall it's just a wonderful film that I was really quite impressed by, that I'd love to see again, but it does have a few frustrations here and there, but I think it's going to work for a lot of people. It's going to do very well. It's certainly not going to just disappear from your radar. So definitely add it on there if you haven't heard about it. If you're interested by it, make sure you seek it out, because it's a really remarkable film. But we should probably wrap things up today. So I'm going to talk about one more film today, and then, we'll probably do another one of these, because we got, 23 films to get through? Good Lord. Let's finish with Conclave, which is the directorial sophomore feature from Edward Berger, who did All Quiet on the Western Front. Now, if you've seen my thoughts on Letterboxd or on the channel previously, you'll know that I wasn't a huge fan of that film. I liked it, I thought it was good, it was very strong, but it didn't blow me away in the way that I think a lot of people were blown away by it. So I didn't really go into Conclave with a huge amount of hype behind the director, but it had been building hype, and I was very interested by what it might be and what it might be like, because I didn't know much other than Ray Fiennes and, popes and the Catholic Church and a thriller. And actually what it ended up being was a really absorbing little kind of political religious thriller set within this very confined space of the Vatican. And I really loved this thing. I thought it really kind of gripped me and then didn't really let me go throughout its entire runtime, even if it does, steer into moments that feel quite on the nose and feel very kind of specific, I think, to a film screenplay rather than, an actual living and breathing Vatican dilemma. Although, who do I? I've never been in the Vatican. I don't know. But I did find this film, surprisingly, to be one of the more moving and emotional experiences of the festival. And this is, it's strange. It's so strange because it's not an emotional film, right? It is not a moving drama at all. It is pretty much just a straightforward, straight-laced thriller with twists and turns. But it really reminded me a lot of my dad, who you will have known on the channel now, passed away earlier in the year. I've written some thoughts on Letterboxd in a bit more detail there. But just to say that, I don't know, it's really interesting what films do jump out at you as just kind of reminders and triggers and things for grief and for the people in your life. And my dad wasn't Catholic, wasn't involved with the Vatican or the Pope, but he was a bishop in the Church of England. And so I got these kind of weird glimpses into organized religion, right? And the way that systems are in place in the church. In my dad's case, the Church of England, but in this film's case, the Catholic Church, these systems of oppression and of kind of duty versus faith versus morals versus, what is and isn't the right thing to do here. And I just felt so weirdly surprised and taken aback by that feeling of watching a lot of things which just completely linked to some of the things that I remember from Dad when he was alive and the stories he told in his own specific way about the church. So I don't know whether that's a reason why I found this to be more absorbing, because I don't know, I do think it does feel quite eerily accurate in many ways to the way systems evolve and operate within organized religion to keep things squashed and to keep things running in the way they want it to run, right? And the power dynamics of the church. I found that really, as I said, emotional, actually, to be honest. I had to go and have a long walk after this one, which is just not what I expected at all. I did not expect Conclave, the religious Vatican thriller, to be one of the films I needed to walk off the most in the festival. But there I was, walking for a few hours through London, teary-eyed, thinking about Dad because of Conclave. So, yeah, weird. I kind of weird one to end on, I suppose. But Conclave has actually been one of the most affecting films of the festival for me in a way which I just didn't expect, and I think sort of blinded me a little bit to some of the more cliched elements in there, because, you know, it's a Vatican thriller with twists and turns. It's gonna go to places which you're either going to be on board with or you're not. But I do think, actually, Edward Berger does a really great job of keeping things feeling grounded within the world of the film and within the space of the film, and not letting it get too distracted by some of the ideas and themes it ends up weaving in there. It does keep things with its central characters crucially through the entire thing, and that means that Ralph Fiennes is able to deliver just honestly one of the most killer performances of the year. I mean, he's fantastic in everything, but he's particularly great in Conclave, and honestly the end of the film was one of the more enjoyable kind of surprises of the festival for me as well. So really enjoyed Conclave. But I think on that note, we should just stop. We should just stop this. I've talked about a bunch of films there. What was that, 6? 7? I don't know, not keeping track. Most importantly, I want to know what you guys thought of any of the films I saw today. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you've seen any of those, or if you're excited for them, you know, whatever. You could just tell me how your day's going and what you had for breakfast or something like that. I don't know. You're cool. I'm gonna sip on this. It's gone cold.